Welcome everyone to another Spotlight session. Really excited this morning. Well, afternoon for you, Scott, right? Where you are in DC. So we're joined by Scott DiGiammarino, who's the CEO of Moviecom. Before we get into that, because this is an incredible story that we really want to share with our audience, Scott, about how you got Moviecom started. But Scott's also got 25 years background with great companies like American Express, who I used to also work with many moons ago as a young fellow. And also Scott has done TED Talks as well. And one that I think that we would also like to dive deeper on here, you talked about, was the psychology of the brain, especially when it talks about motivating and leading others, which I think is very cool. But Moviecom, Scott, let's talk about that first. How did you get, first of all, welcome to Spotlight.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, very cool. And so Moviecom, let's talk about that. How did you get started?
Yeah, so I'm from Boston originally, but I moved to Washington, D.C. in 1992 to take over a region of American Express Financial Advisors that at the time was ranked 173rd out of 176. Yeah, wow. Yeah, it was like, dude, it was a disaster zone. Yeah, terrible profitability. People weren't working that hard. We had the worst employee engagement scores out of all the different American Express business units. Yeah, and I got here. My wife's like, "What did we do?" The family. But and we put some systems into place. We put some strategy. We painted this compelling vision. We got people all excited. And in 1 year, it was exactly 1 year, we went from number 173 to number one.
Yeah, wow.
And we maintained that ranking.
1 year.
1 year. We maintained that ranking for over 20 years. And as you know, working for American Express, the way we measured things was both on hard numbers and soft. So your hard numbers, like your year-over-year growth, your productivity, your retention, and then you had your soft numbers, which are things like employee engagement scores and leadership impact scores, which are kind of like the temperature check of the future of the organization. Like we could tell how happy people were working, and we knew that would relate to big time growth for us, 2, 3, 4 years from now. Yeah. So the challenge we were running into was it was easy to get to number one, but it was harder to stay there. I'll give you an example. And my boss told me we were growing too fast. So in 6 years, we went from one office to 207. Yeah, wow. I went from 30 employees underneath me to 1,600. And then we went from 3 leaders underneath me to well over 100. And because we had these systems in place, all of my peers around the country used to call me and say, "Hey, Scott, what are you doing? Can we come visit you?" Yeah. And they would take their teams, and we used to think we were a hotel because every week we had visitors, right? Yeah, yeah. And what's funny is they go around, they spend a couple of weeks and check us all out, and then magically they'd go back to Seattle and Denver and LA and Dallas, and they would magically have a vice president job opening up where they would constantly hire away my top talent. Yeah, right. So it's like, you laugh, over a 4-year period, we promoted out 153 leaders throughout the rest of the country. Wow. And you remember the American Express days, you were actually recognized for that. Yes. So a lot of recognition, stock options, you waited, attaboys for me, but at some point in time you hit blood. Yeah. In other words, I couldn't generate leaders fast enough to replace the ones that were leaving. Yeah. So my leaders were getting younger and younger. So that was challenge one. Challenge two is that we hired right out of college back in the day. Right. And we didn't know it then, but we know it now. It was the beginning of the millennial generation. And we used to teach these classes 3 hours a day for 3 or 4 days a week. And in the old days, people would laugh at my jokes. They'd laugh at my stories. After a while, they started I saw them starting to tune me out. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever run into this. And I found myself constantly looking for new ways, new materials to get these guys' attention. Yeah. And to motivate them and to inspire them. And because the younger generation had a lesser attention span. Yeah, they couldn't sit in a room for 3 hours anymore. They wanted short video and they wanted to be entertained while they learned. Yes, yeah. And then the last challenge I was having was, as you grow in an organization, you create this bell curve, especially in a sales organization. So we had 10% of the people that were just rock stars.
Yeah.
And then we had 10% of the people that were probably in the wrong job.
Yep.
And then we had everybody else in the middle. And we realized quickly that if we could move the middle section just this much in the right direction, it's called factorial.
Yeah.
And it would have a major impact on profitability. The challenge we were running into is that 80% of people in the middle worked really hard, great intent, but they felt stuck.
Yeah.
And you can look at people's eyes sometimes, and you could just see that they started to check out a little bit, or maybe they started losing hope because they weren't able to move as fast as, say, the top 10%.
Yeah.
So we knew that if we didn't do something different, we would lose 10, 20 years of goodwill that we had built up, because people weren't as engaged as much.
Yes. Yeah.
So I love movies, and I'm the type of guy, when I watch a movie, I remember the lines, I remember the scenes. I'm constantly quoting movie quotes.
My kids hate me.
Right.
Kids hate me. Stop, they say.
So my wife and I were watching this movie one time. It's called Braveheart. Mel Gibson, and this one scene, he's got his face painted blue and white, and he's ready to get his troops go to war. And it was just this riveting moment. I remember my wife saying to me, why don't you use your love for movies as a way of motivating your guys and your team? I'm like, that's a great idea. So part of our internal communication strategy was every Monday morning, we were going to send out a movie clip that had a theme attached to it.
Yeah.
So the theme was usually our principles and our values, integrity, service, collaboration, ethics. But then it turned into like a motivational thing where courage and perseverance and bounce back. So if you worked for me back in the day, we would have a theme of the week. So if the theme was courage, I would type up why courage is important. I say, kind of reminds me of the movie, and I pick a movie, Pitch Perfect, A League of Their Own, Top Gun, Apollo 13. And I would take a clip out of the DVD and attach it to my word courage.
Yep.
And then I would say, I want you to watch this movie. It's all about courage. And for those who've never seen the movie before, it's about X, Y, and Z. But as you're watching this, I'd like you to share back with me the most courageous decision you've ever made in your life.
Love it.
And we'd send this out to 1,600 people every Monday morning for 20 years.
Yeah, wow.
And it was funny. It was funny is we would get back like 300 stories a week from people that had nothing to do with business. They'd say, when I was 9 years old, here's what happened to me. And then we would take those best stories of the week and we would share them with everybody else, assuming you approved it.
Yeah.
We built this culture in this environment where people felt connected to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have to rely on the 29-year-old brand new vice president to engage you, because everybody else, if you were having a bad day, they could help you.
Yeah.
They can support you. And it's because you shared a story. It's all about storytelling, right? It's about you shared a movie together.
Yeah.
So Ken Chenault at American Express. So I got a call from Ken's office one day, and they said, hey, listen, we're going to send McKinsey in to study you guys. And back in Amex days, we spent billions of dollars in McKinsey, which is the largest consulting firm in the world. And McKinsey came in, and they spent 6 weeks. They created that report, and inside the report was this whole section on our culture and our environment.
Mm-hmm.
And what they said was that this storytelling culture that we built, that was supported by these iconic movie clips, was kind of the talk of the town, and it was kind of our secret sauce.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, throughout all of Amex, people are using my clip library in keynote speeches and in PowerPoint presentations and in training and in Slack. People are using our clips all the time to kind of connect with people, get people's attention, and make their messages memorable.
Yeah.
And so that's when I said, maybe we got something here. And I said, maybe I should start calling the Hollywood studios.
Yeah. Well.
So that's kind of the background to how MovieCom got started.
So you were still at American Express when you kicked off those conversations?
I was.
Yeah, right.
So I went in the backyard. I went poolside. I took my laptop and I started banging cold calls to all the major studios in the United States. Disney, Universal, Paramount, Sony, MGM, Lionsgate, Warner Brothers. And I said, look, Fox, I'm like, you don't know me. But let me tell you what I'm doing. And I got to think that there are billions of people around the world, be it employees or students or parents or teachers or leaders or whoever it may be, that if they had something like this, maybe we could change lives.
Yes. Yeah.
And maybe we can get people to feel good about themselves, self-esteem building. And because they can remember the movie when they're by themselves, they can make these principle-based decisions that are in alignment with their personal values.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know, if you know anything about Hollywood, but they move very, very slow. It took me 9.5 years of negotiating. Wow. I actually call it 9.5 years of begging to finally get a yes.
There's a movie in there.
There's a movie, right? But one day I got a call from Universal Studios, and they said, "Hey, listen, I think we got this thing figured out." And long story short, we became the first company in the history of Hollywood to gain legal, underline the word legal, access to their movie libraries to do what I wanted to do.
Yeah, wow. And so, because your motivation, your purpose behind it is to connect with teams, right? To connect with individuals and touch on things that are important, whether it's motivation, etc. So talk a little bit about that, because you know what you just said. There's one thing that's sort of ringing loud. I think you said you had 1,300 people and 300 plus would send in stories.
Yeah, 1,600 people, 300 stories a week.
And that wasn't enough. And I see this a lot where people want to hear from their teams, but then that's it. Nothing else happens. And the team members are like, well, great. Okay, I'm glad I shared it, but it didn't really go anywhere, right? And therefore it didn't really connect and motivate me to what you were trying to do. But then what you said, and that's 25% odd on a number side of it, which is great. But then you said you also then took it a step further and shared. If they were okay with that. And the minute you do that, that's when you show you care.
Correct. And by the way, what you're saying, there's a reason I like you. I get asked a question all the time. What is the number one characteristic that a leader needs these days in order to be successful? And out of all the things you could think about, to me, this is just my opinion, I think the number one thing a great leader needs to have is they need to genuinely care about their people. Because if you genuinely care, you're going to listen. You're going to be willing to take some risks to change the way that you may have been trained and motivated back in the day to so that you could adhere to how the new generation, which by the way is 75% of the global workplace now, wants to be led. And that's the biggest problem, Martin, that we're seeing is that the average age leader today is, late 40s, early 50s. And guys like me were brought up a certain way and trained a certain way and motivated a certain way. And we think because it worked for us, it should work for the new generation. Yeah. But the reality is if you try to do that, you risk disengaging people. They'll check out and they'll ultimately going to quit. Yeah. And the cost of recruiting, training, retaining has never been higher. And that's the problem we try to solve. We try to give today's leaders a new tool, if you will, to motivate, inspire, and engage their people.
That's interesting. That's cool, man, because we're in the same business. We do it through technology, but it's all about how do we allow them to be able to connect to something that they believe in and they understand. Right, and then allow them it's empowering in a bit, but the autonomy to work in a way that makes sense to them. Yes. And I had another spotlight guest, and I shared it with you before actually. And Cara was amazing because she sort of said, we're still trying to lead teams through 400-year-old practices. We're trying to think, I've got a team. I'm 50. I'm 49, so I'm in that age bracket you're talking about, and I'm leading 20-year-old kids. And I'm trying to fit 20 to 50-year-olds in the same DNA bracket of competencies. But the reality is everyone is different and everyone has different competencies. Our question is, how do we rally them together so they can then add the value that really motivates and connects with them?
It's funny. I hear stories. I get emails, calls from people because we do a lot of public speaking, a lot of keynotes, et cetera.
Yes.
As well as my podcast. And I get calls all the time and people tell me about how awesome their leader was. And by the way, my definition of leader is broad. So most people think of leaders just as corporate leaders, you know, from a manager up to a CEO, if you will. But a leader could be a professor, a teacher, a trainer, a coach. It could be a parent. You know, my definition is anybody who's trying to influence behavior, in my mind, is a leader. Right. So, but the challenge is that so I hear these great stories, but then I hear these horror stories. Like, oh my God, I can't believe they just said that to you. Oh my God, I can't believe they just did that to you. And what we're finding is a lot of companies are cutting back on leadership training, leadership fundamentals. And when that happens, people are just getting a leader job just because they hung tough long enough. You know, they were just there long enough. And a lot of leaders today need new and innovative tools as a way of connecting with this new and growing and talented generation of employees.
And so let's sort of look at what would be a classic example for you talking to a leader. You know, because you talked about your challenges early that you were having when you were 160 odd, et cetera, down to number one. So when you're connecting with your clients, your customers, what are typically some of the problems that are being raised?
It's interesting. Our target market when we first launched MovieCon was leaders that have been in the job more than 3 years with the same audience.
Right.
And the reason that we targeted that is because the audience has heard all your stories. You know, they can finish your sentences. They, you know, they've heard the jokes. And they go, but after a while, they start going, oh, there goes Martin again.
That's exactly what happened.
Story number 48.
That's awesome.
Right? Then we added one more element to that, and it was organizations that were decentralized.
Right.
This is pre-COVID, okay? Because the reason decentralized was important at the time was it's hard for leaders as their scopes expand, okay? As you get more and more people underneath you, it's harder to engage people because let's say I'm in Washington, D.C. and I have to go back home to Boston. And I got a team up there. I go up there, I give a speech, I shake some hands, I kiss some babies, you know, and I'm off to Connecticut or wherever, New York, wherever I need to go. It's just much more challenging to make an impact when you're running things that way. And then when COVID hit and Zoom became, you know, the place to go, you know, for our clients, it's interesting is that they're actually subscribing to MovieCon to spice up their Zoom meetings.
Right. Yeah, I like it. I like it.
Kick it off maybe every 15 to 20 minutes or to end strong. So this whole Zoom thing has actually been beneficial to us because it's a way of teeing things up and making it more entertaining. I was going to say, the second thing we're seeing with our clients is they're people that believe in the impact of human capital. Which is all about, I believe in the potential of people. This is kind of my why. You and I were talking about why before. So my why is all, and this may sound corny to you, but I believe in people's potential. I believe that anybody out there can do incredible things, whether it's personally or professionally, right? But I also believe that it takes great leadership to help people tap into that potential. You know, so if you're at a university and you have a great professor, they're gonna help you strive to study harder. Which is a good thing. If you're at a sales organization and you have activity measurements you have to have, and you have a motivational leader and you're having a bad day, he or she can motivate you enough to make those extra dials. You know, visionary leadership. You and I worked with one of the best ones in the world on the Ken Chenault and American Express back in the day.
I agree.
And so that's the big thing is if you believe in human capital, you have to measure that somehow. So one of the ways that we measure that, as you know, back in the day was through employee engagement scores. So our organizations, if you see your employee engagement going up, we knew back in the day that for every 1% increase in engagement was equivalent to XYZ dollars in profitability. Because of the long tail of what happens when people are engaged. So that's the second thing we look for. And then the third thing we look for is for leaders to develop other leaders. Okay. Again, to your point earlier, there's people are focused on the old stuff like situational leadership and mapping a message and, you know, all the stuff that you and I grew up with, which is still relevant and important. But with this new generation, you have to understand that they think differently, act differently, want to be engaged differently. And if you don't adapt, they're out of here. So versus the other way around, most people think that the employees need to adapt to the leader. It's just the other way around.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. What I'm curious about, because I actually had some other questions that I was keen to go and have a chat to you about. But what I'm very curious about, when we talk about the current generation, we could next gen, now gen, etc. How do they go with the older movies?
That's a really good point. So right now it's funny. We have about 7,000 clips in our library at Movie Hub. Okay. Yeah. And they range from about half of them are what we call micro clips. So a micro clip's like a talking GIF. You know, the famous movie, You Can't Handle the Truth, Failure's Not an Option, You Have Me to Low, right?
Oh, yeah, you got,
and the other ones are, right. The other one's like a 1 to 3 minute scene, if you will, that we have trimmers on that you can trim it down if you wanted to.
Yeah.
But 80% of our movies are relatively new.
Right.
They came out in the last 5 or 10 years, right?
Yeah.
But 20% go back into the 90s and 80s, if you will.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and every month, we get a list from our studio partners saying, here's the new movies that just came out. Do you want them?
Yes.
So we actually have a team that will actually, believe it or not, just all they do is watch movies.
Yes.
And say whether or not there's enough clips in the movie to want it.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting you say about the older movies. So I was giving a presentation one day and I was showing the movie Animal House.
Right.
I don't know if you remember Animal House.
Right? Oh, yeah.
That was my generation.
Oh, you've got a movie buff here.
Okay, so I'm showing Animal House, right? A clip from there, it's John Belushi saying, let's do it,
Yeah.
And the audience didn't respond at all. They look at me like I have 5 heads.
Yeah.
And they said, what is it? I think I remember my dad watching this movie.
Yeah.
What ended up happening was in the middle of the speech, I looked at the audience and said, do me a favor, someone take on a cell phone and tell me how old Animal House is. Dude, it's almost 50 years old.
Yeah, well.
And so, but what was interesting is in the studios love this, is a lot of the people, because they'd never seen it before, downloaded the movie.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
It had this new energy again, new views again.
Yeah.
So we try to mix it up a little bit. I will tell you that we are negotiating with television studios, like Netflix, the Amazon Primes, the Apple TVs, because our goal is to have millions and millions and millions of clips in our library.
In circulation, yeah.
And our key is from our technology is it's easy to find because we have artificial intelligence built into our platform where you search by actor's name, the name of the movie, an object like black t-shirt, basketball, BMW, keywords like I can type in the word courage or an entire phrase like I'm proud of you.
Yes.
And it finds it. So think about YouTube on steroids.
Right.
That's kind of what we want to do. But because our leaders are busy, they're busy people, they don't have time to spend hours and hours and hours searching, no matter how great our search is.
Yeah.
So our job is to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to make it easy on them.
I love that, man. I sort of look at, because even what we're doing on the technology side is very much around how do we engage, how do we connect, how do we sort of allow anyone really, but it's highly attractive for the current generation. How do we allow anyone to get working on the things that they're really, they're really into. They're really into it. I remember a lot of my, especially with my American friends, going out to that audience, I used to always open up with a visual, and the visual was of all the deadly animals that Australia has against the world. And it had great white sharks, the 5 of the top 10 deadliest snakes, and the 8 deadliest spiders on the planet. And it horrified everyone. It was like a Jaws movie on steroids when we talk about that. And I used to love it because you could tell a story.
Right.
And people connected with it. And I just used to say, at the end of the day, if they're going to get me, I've got no problems here. We're just going to have fun.
Right. And that's exactly what we do. It's exactly you just said. And it's funny, it kind of ties back into my TED Talk. So I did this TED Talk. It was called Why Movies Move Us. Right. And it was all about the neuroscience of the brain of what happens when people watch short video. And what we learned through our research is that when somebody watches a short video, I'm saying less than 2 or 3 minutes, right?
Yeah.
The studies are showing they'll remember not only what they saw, but also how they felt.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's that emotion that goes in the blah, blah, blah part of the brain. I can't remember now. But it's that emotion that when you're by yourself and you need to make a principle-based decision, hopefully that short scene that you watched will spike the emotion that will help you and influence behavior or what action you're going to take. So, for example, if you remember the old Rocky movie, when studies show when people hear the Rocky music, they want to go work out. When you think of it, you just mentioned Jaws, so which is a 60-year-old movie, right? But when people hear the Jaws soundtrack, they're afraid to go in the water. There was a study, I think, actually in the Tetra, like 50% of people, when they watch hear the Jaws music or watch Jaws, don't want to go in the water.
I know, I was one of them. I was a kid living on the water in Australia. I never wanted to go to the water.
Right. So it just goes back to, think about TikTok. I mean, the billions of views TikTok is getting, people just like flipping, watching the TikTok videos. It's all because they're short, they're entertaining, and they're memorable.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, because we're going to continue this conversation, because even in setting up the tone of the company within our technology, we actually have animation. So we work on the base that the CEO can give the message through voice and not through just words. You also talked about, which I really liked, because we're still working, even in the last 24 hours, the current variant of coronavirus is putting everyone back on alert outside the fact that it's still living and breathing with us. I remember in 2013, the most inspirational leader I've ever worked with, Rajiv Singh. And I remember saying to him, he did what you were talking about. You'd fly to all the different destinations, shake hands, and he was motivational, like Ken. Like, people would just gravitate towards him, and they would get energized, and boom. And I said to him, what happens tomorrow when you leave? And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, that person may get motivated. It was a pretty serious conversation, but it was just triggering me when we were having those Christmas drinks. That person may get motivated for one day. That person may get motivated for 6 months. That person may get motivated never. But how do you lead when you're not in the room?
So it's so funny you say that, because I experienced the exact same thing. So when someone comes in to give a presentation, you're pretty fired up for 48 hours, maybe if you're lucky, 72 hours if you're lucky. And then all that emotion is lost. So one of the use cases for MovieCom is, let's say the CEO had 10 points they were making. Here are the top 10 things I want you to leave. They can actually go on MovieCom. They could film themselves talking about point number 1 or point number 2 or point number 3, maybe for 30 seconds. Guys, remember we talked about integrity? Remember we talked about service? Take a look, and they'll tell why service is important. They'll say, take a look at this movie clip from Meet the Parents, and you know exactly the type of service we're talking about. This video of you, the way our technology works, stitches with the movie clip. So it goes you in the movie clip on a URL or an embed code. And they send that out every Monday morning as a motivational internal drip email campaign to keep the messages alive. And because it's attached to a movie clip, the audience is much more apt to remember it. So that's one of the use cases that leaders use MovieCom for. Yeah, well,
and that's my brain. I'm just thinking that there's a lot of social power in what you're talking about, and how to give a message, how to connect with audiences, and that sort of stuff. I love also the fact that what you said, when people do see it of all generations, it doesn't matter. It could be a current clip that I haven't seen, and I will go want to watch that movie, right? Just that, the power of that is incredible.
So the reason, one of the reasons that we're a fan favorite of the Hollywood studios is sometimes you have a B movie that never really made it big in the movie theaters or online or whatever, that has A-rated clips. So an example of this, there's this great movie out there called Accepted, which I love. And it's all about a bunch of high school kids who could never get into college, so they built their own college.
Right.
It has some great leadership moments.
That is awesome.
Great moments. There's another one called Pitch Perfect. I don't know if you've ever seen Pitch Perfect before. The all-female a cappella clubs. There were 3 of them that were made. great moments in those movies. So it's fun for us to watch the movies, find the clips. People send us clips all the time.
Yeah.
So going back to the social aspect of it. So yeah, it's really my whole thing is we want to make a difference in people's lives, and we want to help leaders. Help people tap into that potential through motivation, inspirational, soft skill training, life lessons, etc.
Yes, yeah. Hey, well, let's do this because you and I could talk forever. Let's do this. Finish off with your podcast. Talk a bit about that, because the one thing I was curious about it, you sort of started with an audience in mind, and then it opened up to a whole different audience as well. So let's wrap up by talking about that.
Yeah. So my background is leadership. Climbed the corporate ladder, Fortune 50 company. So I kind of know that like the back of my hand. And I've seen great leaders and I've seen terrible leaders, right? And so that my plan was to help them, because that was my wheelhouse. But as I mentioned earlier, we started getting these phone calls from professors and teachers saying, listen, I've got a younger audience and I'm trying to engage them, especially because of COVID, when professors and educators had to be on Zoom. And they were doing, 70-minute classes, 3 a day. And they used to call me, they say, I'm spent. I'm just exhausted. I can't, I have to be on all the time. It's just hard. So that became an audience for us. And then we started getting calls from e-learning companies, corporate e-learning, higher ed e-learning, K through 12 e-learning, that wanted to build learning modules around our clips because there's so many lessons in them. And then there's a whole consumer play for us, a big social play for us. So we're talking about that. So we have so many different applications for what we can do, but for us, we need to focus.
Yes.
If we try to be all people, we're never going to make it, right? So right now, our big three are leaders, as I mentioned before, educators, and then we're doing work on the e-learning space.
Yeah, I love that. And the name of the podcast?
Oh, my podcast is called Inspirational Motivational Leadership.
Yeah, I love it. All right. That's cool, man. Hey, Scott, thank you very much, buddy. It's a real pleasure to talk to you, because we have a lot of commonalities of how do we embrace and harness and empower the people that we work with. And you remind me of a lot of good leaders who are actually still very close friends of mine 27 years later. That I worked with at American Express, and some are still there, and some have gone on to have amazing careers. But I just remember the power of how we were together in the moment to be able to actually create something special. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. But I can see why, and your story is just incredible as a leader. And now you're sharing it in different ways. It's just brilliant.
Well, I appreciate it, Marlon. Anything I can do for you, let me know. But I really appreciate the time and having me on the show.
Yeah, no, fantastic, Scott. Thank you very much.
All right, enjoy.